As a kid, I was born in the mid-60s, and I just loved television, even though there were only like 3 or 4 channels. On weekends or summer vacation, I would stay up watching TV till around 1 or 2 a.m. each night. Then the national anthem or America the Beautiful would play and the stations went off, which meant bedtime. The shows that played late at night was mostly horror and science fiction related things. And a lot of it was black and white. I just enjoyed all of it. Now, the 70s kicked off the horror host programs. And yeah, there were people like Vampira before this, but in the 70s, this thing really got going. And it really depended on where you lived to who your horror host was. I was raised in southeast Michigan in a small town between Detroit and Toledo. So I watched shows like The Ghoul, Sir Gray's Ghastly, and Chiller Theater. Saturday Night Live kicked off in the 70s, and that became an instant hit. A Detroit TV station did a horror show that came on after it called Saturday Night Dead, and it had a few wonderfully awful openings to the program.
Dead from Detroit. It's Saturday night.
Then came Elvira, Joe Bob Briggs, and all the rest. Also in the 70s, I remember when I first learned that there were things like horror magazines. It was stuff like Eerie, Creepy, Famous Monsters of Filmland, and all these were precursors to Fangoria, Rue Morgue, and the others. As a kid, I was only able to find a few issues of these, and I just read and reread them. So from early on, from books to movies, I was an obsessed horror fan. With that, I thought I'd make some videos on a few of those old school horror icons. Although nowadays I'm not sure anybody would be remotely interested in something like that. They're not as famous as the people over the past few decades who put on masks and go on killing sprees, and I like those movies quite a bit, but they really haven't contributed as much to the horror genre as people give them credit for. The film industry really isn't all that old, and people making movies at that time just made it up as they went along. You can now do things like editing and special effects on a home computer, but back then effects had to be done with whatever you had on hand. In 1895, Alfred Clark created what is credited as the first motion picture special effect, a reenactment of the beheading of Mary, the Queen of Scots. 1958's Vertigo is credited with the first CGI effect, using it in its opening credits. The first to use CGI in the storyline is 1973's Westworld, and CG has come a long way over the past few decades. And I bring all this up because the first icon I'd like to cover is Lon Chaney. He was an actor and an early innovator of makeup, which sort of blends in with special effects, especially back then. A lot of horror fans are familiar with his son, Lon Chaney Jr., but this is about his father who made it big in the silent film era. Leonidas, or Lon, was born in 1883 in Colorado. He was celebrated for his portrayals of grotesque and tortured characters and his groundbreaking artistry with makeup. There weren't many makeup departments back in those days, so actors usually ended up having to do their own. His ability to transform himself gave him the nickname the Man with 1,000 Faces. Both of his parents were deaf and mute. His mother was born that way, and his father became deaf at the age of 4 after contracting typhoid fever. So Chaney learned to communicate with him through sign language and facial expressions. He was introduced to the theater through his older brother, who was a stagehand, then a stage manager at the Colorado Springs Opera House. Chaney started a stage career in 1902 and began traveling with vaudeville and theater acts, becoming highly regarded as a singer, dancer, and comedian. In 1905, the 22-year-old married 16-year-old singer Frances Cleveland Creighton. She went by the name Cleva. They had one child, Creighton Tull Chaney, who later changed his name to Lon Chaney Jr., probably for the name recognition when he started his own acting career. Marital troubles had begun, and Cleva went to the Majestic Theater where Lon was managing a show, and she attempted suicide by drinking chloride. She survived, but the chloride damaged her voice, which ended her singing career, and they ended up divorced. The suicide attempt and divorce was scandalous, and it forced Chaney out of the theater into film work. It's interesting back then that suicide and divorce was scandalous, but a 22-year-old marrying a 16-year-old, was not a big thing. Nowadays, the subject of suicide and divorce is not scandalous. But if a 22-year-old tries to hook up with a 16-year-old, you might be in a bit of trouble. Chaney ended up at Universal Studios doing small character parts. His skills with makeup helped him gain acting roles and became friends with a husband and wife team who directed movies together. They gave him larger acting roles and encouraged him to play more of the darker and macabre characters. In 1915, Chaney married one of his former colleagues, a recent divorced showgirl named Hazel Hastings. They were able to regain custody of Chaney's 10-year-old son, who had been residing in various homes and boarding schools. By 1917, Chaney was a prominent actor in the studio, although he wasn't making much money, so he asked the studio executive for a raise. And this executive told him that he would never be worth more than $100 per week, proving that throughout history there have always been asshole bosses. So he left that studio and struggled for a bit, just getting small character parts in movies. And after landing a larger role in the 1918 movie Riddle Gone, he became a bigger player in the industry. He had what many at the time considered a breakthrough performance as the Frog in the film The Miracle Man in 1919. This film not only showcased his acting ability, but also his skill as a makeup artist, and he became a top character actor. And he would try anything to transform his face or body for a role, even if it caused him quite a bit of pain and discomfort. For instance, in the movie The Penalty, he had his legs bound in a harness and used leather stumps, which resulted in broken blood vessels. The 1927's London After Midnight is notable mostly for Chaney's makeup. His look is just wonderful, and he plays a vampire sort of character. Plus, this movie falls under the lost films category since the only remaining copies were destroyed in a fire in the 1960s. But someone put together a reconstruction of the film using written dialogue with pictures from the movie. And you can find that on YouTube. It's like around 45 minutes long. In 1935, Todd Browning, who directed London After Midnight, made a remake of it with sound using Bela Lugosi as the vampire character. The name of the remake was Mark of the Vampire, and many people of that time thought the remake was better than the original. While Chaney made a lot of movies that weren't horror, two of the films that most people know him for are 1923's The Hunchback of Notre Dame and 1925's Phantom of the Opera. And I've seen both of these as a kid on TV. The characters of Quasimodo and the Phantom left huge impressions on me. Later, as I got older, I finally read the books. Really enjoyed them. During the filming of a movie named Thunder in the winter of 27, Chaney developed pneumonia. Then in 29, he was diagnosed with bronchial lung cancer. This was made worse by artificial snow during the filming that lodged in his throat, which caused an infection. In 1930, Chaney made his final and only talking film where you can hear his voice. It was a remake of a silent film called The Unholy Three, which is kind of a cool name for a movie.
Feeling fine, thank you. Well, that's fine. Now, what are you going to sing for the folks today? He was a butterfly's daughter.
He died of a throat hemorrhage in August 1930 at the age of 47. Many in Hollywood mourned his passing. Actress Joan Crawford once said that when she watched Chaney work, that she became aware for the first time of the difference between standing in front of a camera and acting. In 1957, the movie A Man of a Thousand Faces, based on Chaney, was made, starring James Cagney. Leonidas Chaney was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park Cemetery in Glendale. His wife Hazel was interred there upon her death in 1933. Both him and his wife were pretty reclusive, not a big part of the Hollywood party scene. He once said that in between pictures, there is no Lon Chaney. And in accordance with his will, Chaney's script has remained unmarked. Lon Chaney worked his butt off with a lot of trial and error, and he took all the crap that life can throw at you, and carved out a little place for him in the world of theater and movies. There's still a few actors who will go all out for their roles, even risking health, although nowadays most seem to just take some form of steroids in order to play superheroes. You can find a lot of Chaney's and other silent movies on YouTube. I think it's worthwhile to take a look at some of them if you've never watched one, especially the horror genre. If anyone even watches this, thanks so much for sticking it out. Good night. Boo.